Hello everyone, Loremaster Sotek here, back with another episode of Lorebeards, and we have a super special episode that I'm extremely excited about, because it's actually been a really long time in the making, which is, not only are we, of course, as I'm sure you imagined, going to be talking about Chaos Dwarfs, but we kind of have a main focus for this on some world building stuff around Warhammer Fantasy languages, which is something that, for those who kind of like to really get into the deep cuts of Warhammer, there is a surprising amount of information. If you go back to like 6th and 7th edition especially, Games Workshop was pretty fond of publishing little like lexicons in certain army books that would come with various like notes on grammatical rules and stuff. The most famous of these was the Causalid lexicon, because it got really in depth, especially in the Black Library books. It was like a whole chunk of the end of the book. But we're going to be talking a lot about languages because Andy Hall has revealed not too long ago that we have a new language that we're going to talk about. But yes, let's welcome Andy Hall, the one, the only, the man, the myth, the legend, someone who I've been super privileged to speak with a couple times, whose work we all have come to completely fall in love with. Andy, how are you doing, good sir?
I'm doing very well. I'm really excited. At the time of recording, I've noticed that the streams of Chaos Dwarfs are going out, and everyone seems very excited about it.
Yeah, I know that's literally exactly what I'm gonna do. Like as soon as we're done here, I'm gonna eat a sandwich and I'm jumping straight, and I think, into some Drazoat stuff. But so let's not waste any time. We're gonna go ahead and just hit a couple of few little questions I've managed to pin up, kind of about some of the more non-Chaos Dwarf races. We only have a small handful of those, and then we're just gonna go full Dawizar mode. So, are you all set, ready to get started?
I am. I will answer to the best of my ability. I am not a walking encyclopedia of Warhammer lore. I try to be, but I'm only human.
True, but you are quite the exceptional human. You've done a lot of really amazing stuff.
Well, yeah, exceptional human is a label that hasn't been used about me a lot of times. So thank you very much for that.
Well, then it's been then they don't know what they're talking about then, because I feel confident in applying it here. All right,
well,
so
thank you. I'll remind my wife to call me that.
Okay, well, I can't promise how that's gonna go, but so one of the first ones I wanted to ask about is in the Total War 2. One of the really exciting things that we saw is Creative Assembly decided to have the Lizardmen not really speak English at all. They speak Saurian, and we kind of see all these different little dialects among the different subspecies, where with the skinks we get like these large vocabularies, and they speak quite a bit, especially in like those legendary lord speeches. And then when you get to the Saurus characters, they speak considerably less words to convey kind of more military meanings. But then we even get down to the Kroxigors with Nakai, who has some of the most hilarious speeches in the game, because they're very kind of one note rumblings more than anything else that convey very simple ideas. Would you be able to kind of elaborate for us? How do you have kind of like a single language, but it breaks down these different ways among the Lizardmen kind of subspecies between like Skink, Saurus, and Kroxigor?
Yeah, I mean, when Games Workshop kind of says, "Oh, there's Warhammer World's full of languages, and here's some lexicons and everything," they obviously they're just putting it in the book. They don't think much beyond that, because they don't have to.
Right.
It's a tabletop game. Here's some cool background about a lexicon and maybe the name of the language. When you come to adapting a video game, which is obviously a multimedia experience, a little bit more thought and depth has to go into that, especially with kind of the audio. And now there's more and more Warhammer video games. Other people are kind of also coming at it from more of a multimedia angle. Even Games Workshop themselves, from when I kind of left those guys, coming up for 10 years ago now. So yeah, going back to the meat of your question, what we have to do is kind of have to expand on that and find out what all these creatures sound like. And And with the Lizardmen, there was definitely kind of a desire to kind of delve into that language. We touched on the language with the dwarfs, which I'm sure we'll come back to later
Mm-hmm.
on in Warhammer 1. And what we did there was pretty much have them speak English, but use some key Causalid phrases to kind of reference the fact where the Lizardmen was certainly well, actually, yeah, they were kind of building on what we'd done with the Beastmen.
Mm-hmm.
That was obviously the first DLC, and that was the first time we went kind of all non-English. Um, and it kind of worked very well with these more bestial kind of creatures, the less kind of humanish creatures, which you could argue that kind of elves and dwarfs are. So yeah, what we wanted to do with the Saurian was kind of really kind of show that the Lizardmen were very different to kind of these kind of humanish or human-like races, and what we also wanted to do was certainly go in the direction of having the skinks be almost the most adapt, because we found they're almost like little scribes.
Mm-hmm.
They're servants to the old servants to the Slan, where the Saurus themselves were very much more militaristic. So, to be honest, it wasn't as complicated as you probably think. We had the Saurian lexicon that we first found in the army book, and then we started to expand on that, kind of mirroring the words and the commands we knew we would need, and the campaign barks that we wanted. So we started
Right.
to fill that in, and then it's just, as I was writing those initial Warhammer 2 scripts, it kind of became obvious that the skinks would be more wordy than the Saurus, who would have a much not a smaller vocabulary, because they're not stupid,
Right.
but they're just more direct to the point, like British Army soldiers or American Army soldiers, just say the words, get it done, go out there. Where the Kroxigor themselves were probably slightly more kind of beast of burden like, and therefore they had a deliberately eliminate. I think we even did siphon off some words in the spreadsheet that
Okay.
only they could use, and it was much more monosyllabic. And then obviously later writers have come on and kind of built that out as we got more and more kind of Lizardman DLC.
Awesome.
Sorry, that's a really long-winded
No,
answer.
that's great. That's the kind of like nitty gritty stuff we love to hear about. So that's awesome. I love that. I really love the idea of using, and that makes a lot of sense too. Of like, okay, we've got these like pillars established in like the old Lizardman books. So using those kind of as branching points of, okay, if we need to convey this sentence, we know this word, this word, this word, and then kind of, filling in the gaps as needed. It's very
Yeah, we
clever.
had some really basic grammatical rules, really. I mean, what you want is the player to kind of start parsing it themselves and grasping what you're doing. So there's no point in having a massively complicated syntax and grammatical structure, um, because you're effectively writing curated gibberish.
Right.
So you want to use consistent noises and sounds and words. This means attack, this means aggression. So the player, almost subconsciously, by playing 8, 9, 10 hours with the Lizardman, gets to learn those noises themselves, even if they're not doing it kind of deliberately.
Right. Mm. And
And
I
obviously
would say y'all are very
that learning.
I would say y'all are very successful, considering how many people like to shout "bawk bawk" about things nowadays. So
That's brilliant. If it turns into a meme, that's all
yeah,
good
hey, even better.
for me. yes. Maybe we'll see that later on with Zharralid.
I absolutely think we will. So speaking of kind of Chaos Dwarfs, and you mentioned earlier, the Beastmen were a really exciting thing for a lot of lore people because they were actually the first of the like not going to speak English races, speaking a fantasy language, where we had Dark Tongue arrive for the first time back in Warhammer 1. And Dark Tongue is like a really elaborate language compared to a lot of the other languages. Even back in like the older days of fantasy, it had like a fairly complex lexicon. But one of the things that I've kind of always wondered about and hear people talk about is we kind of get mentions of how, I think there was even an interview with you, or I can't remember who it was, but back in the days of the Beastmen, about how the Beastmen speak Dark Tongue a little weirdly because with the way their mouths are shaped, they kind of have to use certain elaborations to get it out. But Dark Tongue is so interesting because it kind of covers a lot of bases, right? It's like demons speak Dark Tongue, and so do the Warriors of Chaos, and so do the Beastmen and stuff like that. How is Dark Tongue, like, as far as a language goes, how is it able to kind of exist so easily between all these different races? Like when Beastmen are talking, how is it that the demons really understand what they're saying, as well as like the Warriors of Chaos, etc.?
I mean, Beastmen technically speak Beast Tongue, which is like a derivative of Dark Tongue. So, because obviously they have different kind of mouth shapes, so it almost Beast Tongue is more of a, you know, again a bit not too dissimilar from kind of what we did with the Croxigors.
Right.
It's certainly a version of Dark Tongue, but it's more bestial. It cuts out a lot of syllables, and it kind of suits their kind of tongue structure and their society and how they kind of talk to each other. You know, not just with vocal signs, but with grunts. You know, even scents. I would imagine, and kind of actions. You know. Anyone
I'm sure, like stomping their hooves around in certain ways,
exactly,
and waving their horns, all sorts of stuff.
I just remember Phil Kelly telling me, because he wrote the latest Beastman book before, obviously, I think it was technically a 7th edition book.
Yeah.
He says, I've used the word rutting a lot. So rutting and grinding, their hooves on the ground, stamping, as well as kind of this bestial basic language, and that all comes from kind of Dark Tongue, and even like Skaven, even Queekish is foundational in Dark Tongue. Interestingly, even Eltherin, there's some key words because Dark Tongue is the language of magic. So the surprising amount of words in Eltherin, the language of the elves, obviously as magic users, they use some key phrases, and that's even found in kind of when humans spell cast, and obviously
right
types of magic
kind of
and
foundational magic language.
Exactly, and that goes through into Age of Sigmar. Now all the realms are obviously kind of named after these effectively the chaos language. So you got Skaven and the Beastmen using a more kind of guttural base form. I would imagine kind of chaos mortals or mortals that worship chaos. I can imagine it's Dark Tongue kind of mixed in with a bit of Reichspiel. I imagine those Northmen probably have like their own kind of dialect,
right?
But certainly heavily influenced by Dark Tongue, and then also influenced by Reichspiel, because you know the Empire's just across the water. They have a lot of nobles and other idiots, let's say, who migrate north when they, you know, throw off the shackles of Sigmar and follow their paths of damnation and head north. So I can imagine that influencing it. And then you have the demons themselves, and kind of, I would imagine Dark Tongue. In fact, Dark Tongue does come from the language of the demons. I don't know what that is exactly called, even if it has a separate name. But I can imagine the demons themselves probably, you know, once they're in the realm of chaos, they maybe don't even need to kind of vocalize or speak it. They
Right.
just instantly communicate.
Yeah, kind of
with
probably
themselves.
weird reality splitting kind of crazy stuff going on.
Yeah, yeah, but even in Warhammer 3, when we started talking about the demons and how we was going to vocalize them, we very much wanted all the horrors, all the Zenshin demons to speak kind of dark tongue, or kind of slightly higher level of it, effectively speaking the magic language to define them against the blood letters, which were just kind of growly.
Right. Which I think if you actually mess around with the Zinch units, they do actually throw out various phrases. And like it sounds like gibberish, but it's nope. They're actually communicating some ideas.
It is gibberish.
It's specific
gibberish. That I spent a silly amount of time doing, but this all hits our authenticity pillar,
right?
Which hopefully puts Total War where it should be. Whether it's history
I would say it does.
Warhammer Fantasy,
but people may accuse me of being biased, but. Sorry,
another really rambly answer.
No, hey, that's exactly what we're here for. So please don't apologize by any means of the imagination. You can be as rambly or as blunt about it as you wish. So one thing you kind of mentioned in that was bringing up, we talked a little bit about the language of the elves being Eltherin. Of course, Eltherin has kind of always been a bit of a wibbly wobbly language because it's so closely tied to that true language of magic, the Magista Pretentia or whatever the hell they call it. It's got some fancy word, but one of the things that's really interesting about the elves is that of kind of like the quote unquote civilized races, obviously we know a lot of the human languages because they draw very heavily from the languages of our world, or like a lot of English, but also it's like, oh, the Bretonians speak French and Chileans speak Italian and Estonians speak Spanish or something close to that. But we have a lot on Causalid. But Eltherin has always kind of been a little mysterious. Like some of the prior books, like they'll give you like symbols and be like, oh, this symbol means like this. Like it can stand for all these different ideas. But there's never really seemed to be like an actual functioning lexicon for it. Is there any kind of like information y'all sort of have in the background when it comes to Eltherin as a language?
I mean, other than those words that are kind of almost shared universally, and even more so since the Age of Sigmar, because they've really put that as a foundational part of the Age of Sigmar IP. I know like Thomas Pyrian did kind of a lot of work when he kind of wrote like 6th edition, kind of dating what previously been written by Rick Priestley and stuff. But there isn't that much to go on, and that's one of the reasons we didn't go full on for in Drew here or kind of Tar Eltherin in Warhammer 2. Also, you get to a point if everyone's speaking a different language, the game just becomes a complete mishmash and totally unintelligible for people. Obviously, we want to bring new players in and make sure there is a root basis. So probably only having one race speak a completely made up language is tolerable. You want especially people coming in, they're probably going to play high elves as the first one. You want them to be able to get that character across of these kind of pompous uppity elves,
right?
And that is, I'll be totally honest with you, one of the slight downfalls of using a kind of made-up language is you can miss some of the subtleties that just speaking plain English, does. Hopefully we've kind of navigated that with the Chaos Dwarfs, and you still get like the different characters of Drazov being the young upstart and Zatan being this sadistic general, and you don't just all hear angry evil dwarf. But yeah, kind of spinning back. It's because there was pretty much not much to go on. That's kind of why we had the elves kind of speak English, because obviously the mix of Warhammer 2, we didn't want to kind of just throw it all into kind of
I think that makes a lot of sense. Like I could see people being like, why do the high elves speak English, but like if the wood elves were speaking something totally different, which I mean they kind of do with the forest spirits, So that's actually, y'all kind of found a clever way around that. Where we got like the trees yelling at us, but
yeah. Right, again, look, I think it suits the more alien looking the race, the more disconnected it is from what we are, kind of with skin, eyes, teeth. The more you can justify kind of the crazier ways of communicating. I mean, also, just like I said, from a practical level, there wasn't actually much to go on. Where, when Rick first wrote those dwarf books, he loved the dwarf language. He loved dwarfs. So he.
So what I'm hearing is Rick doesn't
wrote
love
a lot
elves.
of glossary. Well, I can't tell you. I can't speak for Rick. I just know he enjoyed writing a very creative lexicon for Causalid. So
Awesome.
we kind of ran with that.
So I got one last non-Chaos Dwarf question, and then we're going full into the fires of Zhar here. And it's kind of related. So let's talk greenskins for just a second, because greenskins are probably the most amusing as far as like they have this weird space where like it's implied they don't actually speak Reichspiel, but whenever we hear them speak in Warhammer, they always have that hilarious accent, where they just sound like almost like the most offensive version someone could do trying to emulate a British accent from another part of the world. And like that's how they understand one another. That's not really how but there have been like various scenes throughout like the lore where someone else like will switch perspectives and that character hears a very different thing coming out of them of like this so-called goblin tongue. Is there any information about like what goblin tongue actually is? Like as far as like, does it have like a kind of traditional name, or is it just like goblin tongue, deal with it?
I have a vague memory of when Matt Ward was doing either the 7th edition Goblin Army book that we were maybe talking about calling it Scraglash. But I don't think that's written down anywhere.
Scraglash.
Maybe. This is me reaching
it
back. It
sounds goblin-y, but
yeah. But again, you don't want to create a language for them that robs them of the character. And Games Workshop and Warhammer, kind of greenskins in particular, have a very distinctive characterization.
Oh yeah, I think them speaking English is pretty critical to their personality.
Yeah, exactly. So we probably didn't want to go too far down that route at that point, and certainly when we came to adapt them in Total War, we weren't going to create this whole language for them when everyone it's read like a greenskin book knows they speak Southern English, but very specifically they are Millwall fans. The Millwall football. So Millwall Bushwhackers was the firm. So when I say firm, I mean there'll be plenty of people in the audience that know what an English football firm is, and that's kind of the hooligan underground organisation that follow the team and basically have a ruck on a Saturday lunchtime leading up to the match and going back to the train station. And I know Rick was very much like dwarfs are Yorkshire miners and orcs and goblins are South London football hooligans, probably from Millwall.
Amazing.
So that's where we got to with the orc language. So but
they work so well. They genuinely work so well. I honestly think the greenskins of the Warhammer IP are probably like some of the most famous fantasy critters, like in just fantasy IPs in general. They're so iconic. Well,
orcs are green because of Games Workshop, but Warhammer orcs.
Mm-hmm.
That was very much Dave Andrews that first painted his orc army green, and that term greenskins all came. Before that, this we're talking like the mid to early 80s. Before that, orcs were very much of the Tolkien bent and were like brown skinned and like that. But then they painted his green, and that kind of has stuck, and you've seen that in many other IPs ever since.
Yes, I'm so glad. It's cool to have that kind of origin existing in Warhammer. All right, so now let's get into the meat of why we're here. So the Chaos Dwarfs, early access, the gates have finally opened. Everyone's running around crazy, devouring probably as much information as they can get their greedy paws on right now. A lot of followers of the God of Greed are getting initiated today. So we have kind of a list of questions to go over with the Chaos Dwarfs. So one of the we have a little short list I want to get into of questions that have come up more from the community that I've kind of seen being thrown around. One of them, which I know I've talked about extensively with my community, but has been going on a lot with the wider community. Why are Chaos Dwarf captives not being called slaves anymore? They're now going by the term laborers, which seems almost like kind of a PR stunt by the Chaos Dwarfs.
You could call it that. There's two broad reasons. I mean, the first, we already have slave mechanics,
right?
With the Dark Elves, and the second, and this kind of comes from Sean, who I'm sure you've talked to, and he kind of masterminded the Chaos Dwarf. He was effectively the project lead on this. And it was such a great take. It is that, Dark Elves, the word slaves employs like a toy, something to torture and thing. Chaos Dwarfs don't think like that. They see captives as raw materials. They're labor. It's almost, it's deliberately not something to play with. These don't even rise in their esteem that far.
Right.
They're not there to torment. They're there to put to work. They're laborers. And so it's kind of that reason, really. We wanted clarification of game terms. We don't want to kind of repeat ourselves with all the different factions, especially as we go further and further into asynchronous design. And thematically, we like the thought that Chaos Dwarfs, they don't see these things as something to toy or play with or delight in. It's purely, that's coal, that's quarry stuff, and that's labour. It's all the same to them. It's all material to use.
Right, which I really like that idea of, a lot of people ask about the differences between the Dark Elves and the Chaos Dwarfs, of that, like, to the Dark Elves, like, yeah, sure, you're a life, but you exist for fun. You're food to be played with. For the Chaos Dwarfs, it's purely business. Your suffering it's a byproduct. It's not the point.
Yeah. It doesn't even rise in their esteem that far.
Right.
To say you're a slave or something, it actually implies some kind of caring. I care what you think.
I have to bring you down to the level of that. But Chaos Dwarfs are like, nah, you're not even.
There's grass, there's trees, there's laborers.
Right.
It's all to them. Resource. It's all resource.
So another question that came up, as far as just people wanting to ask about, especially like people that are kind of like old book fans and stuff, does the Lamasu actually talk? Because they've kind of been known to, like, they cast magic, so it's like it's implied they speak at people.
Yeah, I mean, the lore's quite distinct, and there was a little bit of I don't want to say a tussle, but myself and Rich, Mr. Eldridge, we were very strongly that we wanted the Lamasu to talk, because it's very clear in the IP they talk. They're even been known to taunt their riders and lure them off their backs so they can destroy or eat them or consume them. So they don't get a full script, but you can certainly hear them kind of talking in Zharralid to their masters or to the situation. So keep an eye out for that.
Awesome. And the last little kind of like community-based question we have is, I've seen a little bit of confusion about this. There are people asking, okay, is it Dawizar or is it Drathzar? Which is it?
It's both.
Right.
So the Chaos Dwarfs call themselves, us called Drathzar. That's on sentence 1 in Tamakan.
Yep.
And they call themselves, us called Draftsar or Draftsar or just Drafts. Sounds like giraffe when I say it. It's not. Draft. No, everyone else, the dwarfs especially, call them Dawizar. So don't worry. If you want to carry on calling them Dawizar, you are perfectly right and entitled to do so. The Chaos Dwarfs also call them Frundar as well, as we know, which is like a despicable insult. You Frundar.
Yep.
Traitorous dwarf or Dawizar. So yeah, both are relevant, but the Chaos Dwarfs call themselves Dwarf or Draftsar, or us called Draftsar if they're being really posh.
So yeah, so if you were speaking to a Chaos Dwarf, you probably wouldn't want to call him a Dawizar to his face.
No,
you wouldn't appreciate it.
No, be like calling me a limey, I guess.
All right, okay, so let's get into Zharralid itself. Very exciting. For those who don't know, Zharralid didn't really have much of a focus. Like it's always been kind of like touched at that, like when Chaos Dwarfs would talk, they didn't speak real Causalid. They spoke something adjacent, but it's never really been dived into. Whereas now it's been dived into. In fact, it didn't even have a name leading up to this. But this new tongue, Zharralid, or Fire Tongue of the Dwarfs, it does definitely bear a lot of similarities to Causalid. But what all kind of went into creating this?
I mean, first was the decision to create it, and again there was a lot of kind of talk and also prototyping by myself, with Sean and Rich, and the audio team. It's like, did we even want it? Because we knew it existed, and Games Workshop were handlers at Workshop, a licensing team, great bunch of guys. They were happy for us to try it out, but obviously there's a cost implication there.
Right.
Rather than just writing English, because you've got to create the lexicon, you've got to make sure it works. It's going to take me a lot of time to do, and then I've got to train all the other writers that are coming onto the project. So, but we thought it was going to be worth it in the end, and I think the results. And once we handed those scripts over to the audio team, Dan Sterling, who kind of recorded pretty much all of the actors, and the actors themselves did a brilliant job in kind of bringing that about.
Yeah, and it sounds incredible. You could say the results speak for themselves. Haha. But
again, it's that fine line between, it is gibberish. And people go, why don't you just get an actor to stand up on the microphone and just go blah 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 blah? But it's curated gibberish. Everything's been written, and there is meaning behind every word they say.
Well, it's got to sound like it's got a sound planned at the very least.
Exactly.
So as far as like Causalid, which is, I guess you could say, is kind of the base tongue for Zharralid, being that they were dwarfs, they spoke Causalid, and then it changed. What would you say are kind of the main differences between Causalid and Zharralid?
Yeah, absolutely. When I kind of planned it, I was always going to use Causalid as the base, because these guys were once dwarfs. These guys were just normal dwarfs at one point, and they just decided to go east. And they kept going east, and they obviously got separated, and they lost the faith of the ancestor gods, or they lost faith in the ancestor gods, whichever way you look at it, which has left them quite bitter.
Right.
About that, as you'll see if you play the narrative campaign in the Realm of Chaos map, and so this separation of, as the lore has it, centuries, it just made sense that they would then start to define their own language and build on that. And I think what we kind of, well, obviously we used Causalid as a base, but I started to bring in a lot of words from Arcadian.
Okay.
So Arcadian, it's a real world language. It's it's pretty much extinct now.
Mhm.
So I read up a lot of a kind of Arcadian, which is kind of in those kind of prototype Persian languages. It's slightly Babylonian in style, because obviously it doing the whole kind of real world template. That's kind
Right.
of where the Chaos Dwarfs are in that. If you were to transplant them to real Earth, so it just made sense to kind of tap into that feel. So we used a lot of Arcadian. So it's a mixture of kind of Causalid, Arcadian, and Dark Tongue as well.
Mhm.
They're talking to demons. They're fashioning. They're binding demons. They're
Right.
literally taking. So and as we know in Warhammer lore, to bind a demon, you need to know its name.
Right.
So if you
So
be
you
able
got,
to
you gotta be
talk
able to
to them,
speak it. Yeah.
yeah. So it's kind of a mixture of all these kind of free kind of languages, two of which are total fictional, but one one which was a very much a real world language.
Awesome.
Thank God for YouTube. Someone would have been able to do it.
Yep. Kind of going with that, I would assume, but it'd be good to hear any notes from you about it. When the dwarves and the Chaos Dwarfs are presumably shouting at one another in anger across the battlefield, would it be safe to say that they can understand one another? Though I imagine there might be a little bit of difficulty. Like, is there any kind of, like, in your head, what's like to the extent they could hold a conversation?
I think they can. I pretty much agree with your take. I think they'd be able to, like, if for instance I watched an ancient English person speak, and again you can kind of find those kind of investigations on YouTube. An English person or a British person from like the 12th, 13th century, it's almost a different language
Right.
to modern English, but you can pick it out and you can get the gist of it. And again, if you think that effectively the Western dwarfs are talking what the Chaos Dwarfs would perceive as kind of an ancient language to them at
Right.
this point, or a backward language,
An outdated, inferior tongue. Yeah.
inferior, perfect. Yeah, outdated, inferior. So they would definitely get the gist. But they're also intelligent, and it's probably in their interest to learn that language. And it's just like I saw Prince Charles on TV the other day speaking flawless German because he was in Germany on a state visit. So these people, probably it's in their interest to know, to understand your enemies and how they talk, whatever passes for diplomacy between these two races.
Right. Well, I'm sure
days.
it would not be surprising that, like, especially the sorcerer prophets or the more learned Chaos Dwarfs know, like, the old tongue just purely out of spite for the so
Absolutely.
they can make sure all of their barbs are delivered perfectly.
Like, going back to our earlier point about how unlike the Dark Elves, which do take joy in being evil, spiteful, malignant, and the Chaos Dwarfs just seeing everything as a resource, the one exception is the dwarfs.
Right.
They absolutely take
then
joy.
It's personal.
Yeah, it is. They hate them.
Awesome. So something you said earlier that I kind of just want to touch on a little more. You mentioned kind of how, like, well, the Chaos Dwarfs started developing their own tongue, and a lot of that revolved around the demon smithing, where it's like, you can't just, like, if you're going to bind demons and force them to do what you want, true names are very important, and demon names are weird. There's actually some very well developed lore about it, but they're like, like Kugoth Plaguefather, that's like an epithet. That's not his actual name. His name is something way weirder, that has a lot more syllables. So
loads more syllables. And
I would guess that it was kind of like Hashit's influence teaching them the art of demon binding. Would it be safe to say that's what drove them to kind of create Zharralid? Of like this influence being like, all right, if you want to, use my wisdom in order to make more powerful weapons and tools and stuff, things are gonna have to adjust here.
I don't think language creation is ever that deliberate,
Right.
apart from when you're doing it for a bloody computer game. Language evolves, doesn't it? So I think at whatever point they kind of cast off their worship of the ancestor gods and embraced Hashut, and he then taught them through prophecy or however the kind of names of demons and the basics of Dark Tongue. And I think that would then filter through into whatever state Causalid was at that point. You know, that they'll stop talking. You know, to whatever labourer, get me this or get me that, and they would then use that, and then it would start trickling down and kind of into the pool of words that they use, and you know, just like real world languages,
right.
and they would adapt and form whatever the modern version of Zharralid is at the moment.
Okay, awesome. So speaking a little bit about that kind of lexicon, are there any kind of highlights you can give us about Zharralid? Some maybe like key phrases or notable words that have some like this is something you're definitely going to hear extensively about, or some of the like maybe the rules behind it. If there's anything there that kind of jumps out at you.
Yeah, I think you'll hear Domitash a lot, which means to dominate. Draz means dark or darkness. Causalid word. Dumbskull Kai is demon smith. Dumbskull is kind of demon.
Okay.
Again, and we had kind of like an unofficial kind of rule of thumb that, you know, every 10 to 15 words an English word would be in there,
just to give you an anchor point.
Right. Absolutely, an anchor point. So like Holtaz means stop, for instance.
Holtaz.
Shitty means short. Just so people can go, oh, I think that was Holt. So why that's kind of not a law reason, it was just a kind of a practical reason to
awesome.
Like you say.
Right. So kind of a bit of a personal question, but I know that I've spoken to some people who would love this. So with kind of like the little bit of the rules you talked about with looking at these older languages from our world, kind of these like ancient languages that are related back to like Babylon and stuff, and mixing in some Dark Tongue, is there any hope of you kind of releasing some of your cheat sheet notes at some point for people that like maybe want to use Fire Tongue for their own little personal fan writings or Warhammer roleplay campaign type things?
I think so. There's certainly no reason why we wouldn't. It's purely a resource thing, really, because it exists on lots of spreadsheets that aren't fit for public consumption.
Right. Yeah.
So
kind of like a scrolled napkin. Yeah.
Yeah. I need to kind of get that to our guys in brand to create some nice marketable assets and give it. Maybe release it in a blog format.
That would be so awesome.
Again, that then needs to go through our approval process. So, there's certainly a desire from me to do that. It's just a resource issue. If we do that, we can't do something else. So,
right.
Let's say, hopefully.
Yeah, maybe one day would be cool if it happens.
Yes. Yeah, I know you've asked me about this several times. And you've been asking about like doing a language chat with you, like we're doing now, and I kept saying, hold. I couldn't tell you why, but hopefully it's obvious now because I'm working on.
For anyone watching, language. I've been pestering Andy about language stuff. I think it's been like 2 years. It's just been like, he's like, you'll see why. Not yet. It's like, all right, I'll be back. So speaking of Zharralid, so we know like Chaos Dwarfs are throwing around Zharralid a little but kind of within the Chaos Dwarf roster, are there any other groups that speak Zharralid, whether it's like the Hobgoblins or even the Kadai? Like the Kadai, they kind of seem more like creatures that would just scream at you. I don't think I would necessarily expect them to even be able to talk, but Hobgoblins definitely talk. So what kind of about like the other little creatures running around in the Chaos Dwarf roster?
Yeah, I think again you're spot on. The Kadai, they're kind of trapped demons. I'm not even sure their demon essence is even sentient to what they are or what they were when they were in the realm of chaos.
Mm.
So yeah, they're more kind of what we call sound designed, more kind of creatures. The hobgoblins they speak Zharralid, Zharralid, because that's the language of where they are, and you know they want to impress their masters, little treacherous gits that they are.
Right.
So they certainly speak Zharralid, and kind of lord it over their unfortunate kind of cousins who they order and shackle around.
They do so enjoy being the top dog of the not at all being treated well group.
Despicable.
They really are. So would kind of picking your brain a little bit about this, would you say that maybe there are any other, like, of the races that we all like know and love, are there any others that you say would probably be likely to understand and speak Zharralid, as far as like maybe like a good idea would be like the Hobgoblin Khanates who send the Wolf Riders, because like the Wolf Scouts, for those unaware, which is why they look so different in the roster, the Wolf Raiders are not actually kind of your traditional slave hobgoblins. They're kind of regular hobgoblins that come in on their Wolf Riders, which is why they have like that really awesome armor with like the little scales and stuff. Or even the ogres. We know there's like some ogre tribes that kind of consider the Chaos Dwarfs to be allies. The Iron Skin tribe is known for, they get a lot of their guns and stuff from trading with the Chaos Dwarfs. Well, would you say it's safe to say they speak Zharralid, or do the Chaos Dwarfs kind of keep a tight lid on their own tongue?
I would say that they would speak Zharralid, or even like a basic rudimentary version of it. I'm not sure how many languages an ogre can keep in his head.
I can't imagine a ton.
Yeah, but they've probably picked up, you know, some broken bits and words enough to communicate. I view it through the frame of you know, is it cool? Does it work?
Right.
If this was a Hollywood movie, would the script go better if the ogres could, if the ogre who's talking to the Chaos Dwarf could speak Zharralid? And probably the answer is yes. And it's the same reason, right? That the Khanate would probably speak it as well, because they're sharing the lands, but they're certainly close to each other, and they would need to communicate rather than spend 10 minutes kind of trying to work out how using a semaphore or something, how to communicate. You know, if you were writing the screenplay of the movie of that confrontation, you'd probably just have them using one shared language.
Yeah, and I'm sure for the Chaos Dwarfs, they prefer like, no, you come to me, you figure out what I'm saying. I'm not gonna learn your nonsense.
Exactly. So yeah, rather than containing the language, they probably just expect everyone to speak theirs.
Awesome. And kind of the last question I've got on you, as we're kind of coming up on time here, is there any like kind of magical or sinister properties to Fire Tongue, as far as would it be the language used by the, or I don't know if they would use specifically Dark Tongue, well, like when you have like a demon smith who's commanding the Kadai, you know, he's ordering them forward, or they're commanding the demon engines, these machines that they've bound the demons in so they can't refuse what the Chaos Dwarfs are demanding of them. Is that something that may be carried in the language of Zharralid, kind of almost like these words of power to dominate other things, or would they use like a different, like more traditional Dark Tongue in those instances?
I think it would certainly revert more to the kind of the Dark Tongue end of Zharralid, but almost like how like dwarfs have kind of fashioned runes into items and stuff.
Right.
I almost like to think that, you know, the Chaos Dwarfs are doing that too, but with the language as well. So bringing in these kind of Dark Tongue words and kind of fortifying it with almost kind of magical grammar.
That makes sense, because we see on the Kadai and the Kadai Destroyer, y'all, there's actually Dark Tongue runes carved in on all those armor plates that keep them bound.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Awesome. That is super cool. Well, this was great. Zharralid, I don't think a lot of people realize how exciting of a development this is. There really hasn't been any real expansion on the language outside of Total War. I mean, the Total War games have, like, between Total War 2 really hammering in on the Lizardmen and Dark Tongue being very heavily hammered in with or Beast Tongue, I should say, being heavily hammered in Warhammer 1. Y'all have put in so much work on expanding a lot of the spoken languages of these races. Because, it was just like script, but other than like maybe a key phrase in a Black Library book, you wouldn't really get to see or mess with it too much. So the fact that y'all have not only been taking languages we know and love and like bringing those to life, but now you're even forging into new territories is just amazing. Though I'm sure it's a lot of work.
It was a lot of work, but hopefully people enjoy it, and they don't just wish they were speaking English after all. That's my fear.
Hey, that's what subtitles are for, and we've got those already built in for them. Well, Andy, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. I'm sure things are insanely busy right now as we're building up to the Chaos Dwarf release. So I just want to say it's always just such an honor to get to chat with you about this stuff. Like you've been such a massive foundational figure in like not only keeping Warhammer alive when it was kind of in the hospital bed after all the end time stuff, but we're heading into this crazy new golden age of I'm sitting down every week and we got like things flying in from Games Workshop for the old world, and like we've got all these crazy new book releases for like the roleplay game and all this stuff, and you were such a pivotal piece of that, of like kind of being that bridge. No, like it's important for people to know this kind of stuff. So thank you so much for just all the amazing work you've put into not only keeping the universe breathing but expanding. And like, man, we're going into another golden age, and it's so amazing to get to see it.
Just a white dwarf writer that got lucky.
Well, I'm glad you didn't just coast on that luckiness, and you've done some really amazing things with it.
Well, thank you very much. It's always a labour of love. I love this world. And yeah, I'm fortunate enough to have a job I really enjoy, and it's great. It's a great team.
I do have one last question for you, which is completely unrelated. So a lot of people may not know this, but you were actually pretty instrumental and important in another Warhammer IP, being Blood Bowl.
Yes.
So with kind of like Blood Bowl also having a lot of really cool resurgences in recent times, what is your favorite team? I just have to know this for my own personal reasons. Like if someone was like, you have to pick one team, you get everybody, but you get one team to play a new season with, who are you going with?
Well, it probably shocking actually, because I've got it's my human team, which are just over there. The Marauders there. I have a Skaven team, obviously, well-known Skaven player. But I've always just liked the flexibility of the human team, and I wrote some Blood Bowl fiction for Black Library, and it's always been kind of focused around Griff, the Reichland Reavers and Griff Oberwald, and the Marauders and stuff.
The beloved everyman Griff Oberwald.
Yeah.
He has some really hilarious commercials. I think Yep, Death on the Pitch. Yep, great book.
I've got 2 stories in there. So I am a Blood Bowl fan. Of course, it's something Jervis always used to say to me. He goes, people think Blood Bowl's in the Warhammer world. It's not in the Warhammer world. Because in the Blood Bowl world, they've got television. Yeah.
Well, we do have Midden Ball in the Warhammer world. That's as far as that goes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you again so much for coming on. Really appreciate you spending time with us. And that's it. Thanks for watching, everybody. And any kind of closing thoughts, Andy?
No. Enjoy Chaos Dwarfs, and I'll see you on the battlefields.
Yep. Can't wait. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Bye-bye.